Don't all volunteer at once. Adam, could you take some notes?
Yeah, I can start at least.
Okay. Yeah, basically all we need to do is figure out what the resolution of each of the issues is.
Okay, so I don't need to record what everyone says.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be incredibly detailed. Just figure out what we said we wanted to do about each one. Okay.
All right.
So here's the list of things for today. We obviously have a long list of issues for discussion. Hopefully we can get at least well into it. We're going to start with Jan Ivar and then move to Taylor, who has a ton of issues relating to the object model. And then if time permits, I'll have various miscellaneous issues that I'll try to get through. So we're going to hand this over to Jan Ivar, who's going to talk about offer to receive.
All right. Can you hear me? All right.
Yeah.
Yes. So there were two related issues here. One was that offer to receive. Well, let me do it in the other order. Offer to receive. We support true and false for legacy, called on create offer, and basically the spec was kind of vague about what it said to act as if a transceiver of a similar kind had already been created. That wasn't clear whether that only affected create offer behavior or if it actually called add transceiver. And the other issue was that if you called create offer more than once with offer to receive, the legacy behavior was to you called create offer again without offer to receive something, it would remove previous instances, whereas that's hard to implement for legacy. And I think so. The proposed solution was for offer to receive to actually create a transceiver when you call create offer, even though that does not entirely match legacy implementations. It should cover all the most typical cases, because the only time it would not it would break someone would be if you call create offer twice without calling set local description in between, and hopefully that's rare. So there's a pull request for that, and you can go to the next slide. It basically has the text. So basically, whenever so we could simplify the text a little bit from before. So again, when this is false, nothing happens. But when offer to receive video true or audio true is specified, so the language is whenever this is given a non-false value and the peer connection has no non-stop send, receive, or receive only audio transceivers for audio, create offer must, as its first step, invoke the equivalent of add transceiver audio on the peer connection object, except that this must not update the negotiation needed flag. And provided this does not fail, proceed with create offer's regular steps. And if anyone wants to wordsmith, so this doesn't sound like a robot talking, that'd be great. But that's pretty much it. Any questions?
Yeah, I think this does resolve, I guess Cullen's not here, but I think this does resolve Cullen's issue
Great.
as well.
Right.
So, I mean, this is Ecker. I mean, the entire premise of create offer is supposed to be that it does not have this kind of side effect. So, this seems to be
right.
like actually it seems a rather substantial change, not just a trivial technical change. Yeah, I mean that's the whole reason for the separation between create offer and set level.
Right. I think the PR also renames this to legacy config settings. So I think when it was discussed in the issue, it seemed like we thought that this would be an okay side effect for the few cases where people still use this flag, instead of since there's now the new sanctioned way to do this would be to call for the JS client to call add transceiver with a string directly. So this was a way to get the legacy behavior to match.
I mean, but if you change wait a second, if you change the change the setting, I don't understand how how this is useful at all.
How does it what?
Maybe I misunderstand what you're saying, but if you change the syntax, if you change the name of the configuration, then I don't understand how does that like work at all.
Change the name?
I thought you just said you were suggesting changing the name of the parameter.
Oh, yeah, I forgot to point that out in the PR. It also does that. We can keep that or not. But the intent, I think, was for this to be a legacy thing. I believe Safari, for instance, does not plan to implement this. So it's more of a, there's two ways of doing things.
So maybe I'm not clear on what the exact change you're suggesting is. Are you suggesting changing the name so that calling applications will not work properly? Because that seems like problematic.
Sorry, no. This is just a document paragraph change.
Yeah, it's just changing the behavior slightly to just make it clear exactly what happens.
Yeah. This was already specified. The just wording wasn't very clear. It said act as if this other method is already being called. But the problem with only acting like it in createOffer is the new architecture requires a lot of things to exist afterwards, like a transceiver, a sender, and receiver object. So if you go ahead and don't create any of those, but you call createOffer with offer to receive video and offer to receive audio true, how is that going to work after now that if we don't have those objects, and when would those have been created? So I
would assume they'd be created at set local time. As all other transceivers are created.
Well, that would not support early media on other things, where the model now has these objects, this triumvirate of objects created way earlier.
I don't understand why it doesn't support early media perfectly
well. How would you get the receiver track, the early track in that case?
I said you created it at local time, which is the thing that happens right after a createOffer.
Well, but actually, Add Transceiver creates them before that, right?
No. I appreciate that, but I guess my point is we're discussing the behavior of we're discussing the potential behavior of how do you say it?
Sorry, I'm just checking the temperature.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry,
if we're saying that set local needs to create transceivers, and that affects JSEP. So basically, the alternatives to fix this issue are either like we add new logic in JSEP, we add these like special transceivers in WebRTC 1.0 that like only impact the JSEP algorithm, but aren't returned by any other API, or we do this. And this seems like the easiest alternative. Personally, I think it'll satisfy the backwards compatibility use case, and we should just move on.
Okay, I guess, as I say, this seems like a pretty major architectural change to JSEP, even though it sounds trivial. Because JSEP, the entire point is createOffer is supposed to be...
This is the one that doesn't require any changes in JSEP, because it's just, offer to receive means you invoke add transceiver and then do normal createOffer.
I'm not sure. I don't find that particularly persuasive. Yes, you can just say that there's synthetic sugar, but it's actually an architectural change in the meaning of createOffer.
Well, no, but answer
only for these
the same as if you call, yeah.
Does anyone in fact do this?
I don't think any browser
does anyone in fact
does implement transceivers fully yet.
I guess what I'm trying to understand is, like, the only reason to do this, as far as I can tell, is on the theory that somehow there is some legacy software out there that actually depends on this behavior with this calling convention. Is there any such software, either in client or server, application?
Lots of applications today are using offer to receive audio, video. That's like the only way you can do it in Chrome.
Yeah. the question is how you would integrate offer to receive audio video with transceivers, right? When people do transceivers. Like what happens?
Okay.
All right, well, what do we want to do? Maybe, Ecker, you want to create an alternate proposal, or?
Okay. Did you drop?
What's the? I didn't hear the response.
We've lost him, apparently.
I think we lost Ecker.
Oh, okay.
He's not in the list of participants.
Well,
Is
now that
Martin
it's
there?
gone, can we agree to
What
it?
should we put in the notes for this, in the minutes for this one?
Can we go through all the
Some-
other issues and come back to this if we have time?
Okay. So we'll move on. Taylor, you have the floor.
Sure. So, just starting from the top of the list, I guess. This one is pretty independent of the rest of the issues. Can you move to the next slide? So basically,
We're now back.
okay, well, do we want to continue or move back to that?
Let's just continue.
I mean, I don't want this issue closed. We're happy to discuss it at this time or another time.
Well, maybe the resolution is just, can you comment on the PR, Ecker?
Yeah.
Okay, back to Taylor.
Okay, so the issue here is that there's a difference between how the SSRC field is interpreted between the ORTC and WebRTC. And the ORTC API, and Bernard, correct me if I'm wrong on this, if you leave the SSRC field undefined, then the implementation will choose an SSRC on its own, and it will, handle conflicts, and any required changes automatically. Whereas if you specify the SSRC explicitly, then you need to handle those kinds of issues yourself. And WebRTC, it's always the implementation user agent that's responsible for choosing SSRCs. So it's always using the former behavior, but yet there is an SSRC field in these various RTP encoding parameters structures. That creates an issue if you wanted to implement WebRTC in terms of RTC, and it also could cause practical issues if, for example, you call get parameters and it returns the current SSRC that's being used, but in the meantime, something happens that requires it to change, and then you call set parameters with the old SSRC. Does that throw an invalid modification error, or is the field just ignored? And I would say if there isn't any use case for retrieving SSRC, let's just leave it out of the WebRTC structures. And it's still there in stats if you really need it for some reason.
Yeah, I guess the question I have, Taylor, is if you're going to do that, is there any use to the FEC and RTX dictionaries? Because currently the SSRC is the only thing in them.
I guess those would be removed too then.
Yeah, personally, I don't see, I see the issue of, the SSRC conflict, and it seems weird to have get parameters and set parameters cause an error if you don't make any changes.
Mm-hmm. It's basically the only thing in the set of parameters that isn't determined entirely by the SDP you set or the get parameters, set parameters calls. So I'd say just let's remove the oddity if we don't need it.
Yeah, I agree it's an oddball, and it's probably only there because when I was originally putting the dictionary in there, I was just copying things from WebRTC and didn't consider this.
Okay. So why don't you develop a PR for this, Taylor?
Okay.
Taylor, are you on IRC?
I'm not.
Okay.
Yeah. So Adam, the resolution is for Taylor to do a PR.
Yes.
To remove SSRC
Okay.
and other things that would be empty without it. Okay, now sort of have a cluster of issues about the ICE transport and DTLS transport objects. So first of all, in the normal cases, when should the objects be created? And, be returned by the RTB sender receiver transport attribute. I would suggest when a local description is applied, since nothing is going to happen with, on the wire until then. Any objections to that? All right. And we should also, add the necessary text to, describe how, when bundling is negotiated, different senders and receivers would start pointing to the same transport instead of the individual transports they were prepared to receive things on before. And I guess if there are no objections to that, I can take responsibility for writing the PR.
Okay.
So people agree with Taylor's suggestion on the first point where the transport objects are created?
Yeah. That's
So
what I heard.
Now,
Tim here, just to clarify, if I understand that correctly, basically what you're saying is that there's nothing in those objects that would influence what you wanted to do in terms of creating a local description. So basically what you're saying, if you get an offer, there's nothing that would appear in those objects that would affect how you created the local description and applied it.
Right, because it's essentially read-only.
Yeah, but so for example, there can't be anything in there about, I can't remember what's in those objects, in the ICE transport and the DTLS transport objects, but do they have like, version numbers or something where you can say, well, hey, he's sending me DTLS version 1 and I don't want to do that?
well, for example, with ICE transport, you have I assume the remote UFRAG password. Let me check really quickly. So, yeah, you could argue that, when you set a remote description, you may want to inspect the ICE parameters and use the ICE server interface to do that. But in that case, why are the transport attributes nullable in the first place? I guess because you can call add transceiver and then there's...
Right.
So, Bernard, with RTC, is it possible to have an ICE transport that you only have remote info, no local info?
No.
Yeah, so again, it's an RTC mapping issue, but I don't see there being a use case for having, knowing the remote UFRAG password before you have done an offer answer.
No, me neither, but that's what we're ruling out, basically. But I think that's not a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I guess resolution of this is for Taylor, create a PR.
Yeah. Now, going into the more corner cases, actually, can you skip to the next slide? Sorry, and reorder them in advance.
Which one, 1365 or?
I guess 1365 is kind of what introduces the topic of.
Okay.
Oh, no, maybe not. There's one that mentions basically what happens when you change the remote fingerprint and have a new DTLS association. Do you get a new DTLS
this one, 1406.
Okay. Yeah, so does an ICE restart result in new ICE transports? Does a new DTLS association result in new DTLS transport? And I would say for the first question, no, you don't get a new ICE transport because ICE is written in such a way that when you do an ICE restart, you can continue sending media on the existing candidate pair that was working, and then as soon as ICE completes for the next generation of candidates, you can seamlessly switch to sending media on that pair. So I would say, conceptually, it makes sense to have a single ICE transport object, whereas with DTLS, the DTLS associations are independent, and the way WebRTC is written, you would need to create a new DTLS transport for every DTLS association. So there, it makes more sense to have new DTLS transport objects. So then I would say basically, if you set a remote description with a new fingerprint, then you get a new DTLS transport object. Yeah, if there already was one before.
That's again, Tim here. It's not the case that the fingerprint always changes when you create a new, when you restart a DTLS session.
Okay, sorry. When I'm saying fingerprint changing, I'm thinking of sort of older ways, but TLS ID changing is
okay.
Whatever changing in STP that indicates new association.
So Taylor, it's Martin here. When you set the remote description is inconsistent with your previous decision to change it when you set the local description.
That was, again, just considering the simplest cases.
Yeah,
well,
I think you want to make it the same.
Okay, that's a good point. So then maybe it's that you only have a DTLS transport when you set an answer. Would that work? Because, you do need an offer answer before you can do, have a new DTLS association. We've been over the reasons for that before.
So you're saying after the answer is applied, if the remote fingerprint changed, then you create a new DTLS transport.
Mm-hmm. And also for the initial offer answer, that's when it'd be created as well.
This is Edgar. I'm actually worried about the fact that this seems like oddly inconsistent between ICE and DTLS, and they actually have relatively similar properties in terms of being able to keep doing things while other things are happening, or they should, and the ICE properties are not having a new ICE transport, but having the ICE properties change out from under you, including the parameters, strikes me as extraordinarily odd. Oh, it's the same ICE transport except the UFRAG and password are different. That does not seem okay. Yeah. That's not what there are two different ICE contexts, and they're being make before break. Not there's one ICE context where somebody has had a brain transplant.
Yeah, in this case, it's not even the same endpoints. Right.
So basically what you're saying is when we create a new DTLS transport, we also create a new ICE transport.
No, I don't think those should have to be necessarily shouldn't necessarily be a consequence. I'm just saying, in this particular case, if you're actually connecting to different endpoints, it's weird to use the same ICE transport.
That's what I mean. When you create a new DTLS transport, because the fingerprint changed, you also create a new ICE transport.
ID. But yeah, I agree about that.
I mean, perhaps let's take the simpler case where you just change the ICE transport, which is totally legal, right? Like you just do an ICE restart. Like I don't understand the argument for why that doesn't create a new ICE transport. It seems to be it certainly is a new ICE transport for the version of ICE.
Well, I mean, basically the way you would do an ICE restart with ORTC in the typical case is call ICE transport.start with a new ICE gatherer, correct?
I'm not sure why what ORTC does is relevant for this discussion.
All right.
But you can always do, even in ORTC, you can do an ICE restart effectively by creating a new ICE transport.
Right.
So,
It's just that then it's the application's responsibility to switch over.
Right.
well,
Probably not an issue.
because the DTLS, as long as the DTLS transport moves over to the new ICE transport at the right time, you don't want to change the DTLS transport just for an ICE restart, obviously.
Well, the thing though is, remember though, the DTLS transport is constructed from the ICE transport, right, Peter? So you can't. It's not like you move over. There's no. You can.
Well,
there's no.
That's one reason why you would want to keep the ICE transport the same, is so that you can receive packets from either ICE candidate pair into the same DTLS transport. Because if you have two different ICE transports, how does the DTLS transport receive?
And like, how does the application know when it's switched over? You know, how does it get access to both of them?
Well, but I mean, right now you're just lying about it, right? I mean, so like, so you start with ICE transport A, and it has
we're defining what the boundary of the object is.
No, what I'm saying is that like right now, if you say so right now you start an ICE transport and it has a given UFrag and password parameter, right? And
No.
And you're
No, ICE transport can have different UFrag and passwords at different times.
I understand it. Technically can have that, but that's incoherent because you're busy sending on. So if you let me finish, I'll tell you. From the perspective of ICE, these are two entirely different objects, and so you set up an ICE transport. I'm sorry.
ICE has two different concepts of a session. One that includes multiple restarts and one that doesn't. So we're basically picking which one a nice transport represents.
Yeah, but again, that's what I meant by like defining boundary of the object. ICE is written in such a way that an ICE restart is not just start ICE again from scratch.
So are you talking about 5245 or 5245 BIS?
BIS.
Okay, but the number of dependencies goes to 5245. So this is not yet finished. So I think, can we talk about the things actually in RFC?
Well, we're referencing BIS all over the place in our dependency graphs. So
well, that's a really serious problem because there's not yet consensus to do that. And that's precisely why I'm holding a discussion on this at the IES, only discuss on the overview document on the IESG. So we need to resolve that question as well.
This is relevant to RFC 5245 as well. So let's not get sidetracked.
Yeah,
I mean my point is
you're splitting hairs between BIS and non-BIS anyway.
Okay, so
I don't think
a question.
Sorry. Let me ask a question here. So if you need a new ICE transport object when you do an ICE restart, then does that mean basically you don't have access to the existing ICE state?
But I mean, I don't understand. Okay, let's just take a step back. The object model as currently described has room for one ICE transport with one set of parameters on it, right? And so like when I query for the parameters for say ufrag, it's got to say one thing or the other. And if I'm doing a nice restart, neither of those things is correct. They're both correct or they're neither correct. And so whether you say I swap the objects out or you say the objects just slightly change their parameters, like the bottom line is you no longer have access to the existing ICE context or you don't have access to the new one. So, I mean, if you want to have access to both, then you need a data structure which allows you to access both, not one which silently becomes, not just mutates to the other at some unspecified time.
Well, the context that you're describing is called an ICE gatherer, at least in ORTC.
Right.
But we didn't stick that in the WebRTC 1.0. Just because
well,
it's
not gathering, it's handshaking, right? I mean, it's doing ICE checking. During an ICE restart, you continue to send on the existing pairs at the same time as you're checking on new pairs. And so, like, that's just the state of the protocol.
Right.
And then the state, as you know, defining that table would be connected, but not completed.
Right. And so my point is, so when I in those circumstances, I promote parameters and ask for you if I can pass. If I can pass, I think I should see.
The latest one.
But I mean, that's not the one. That is not, in fact, the one on which I have successful checks. That is the one in which I had, in which I'm currently doing checks.
Okay, but you can get the candidate pair object.
Yeah, the candidate pair object can give you what you're currently sending on.
I mean, this is just like I've taken ICE state A and ICE state B, which are actually separate states, and glued them together in some union that doesn't make any sense to the user at all.
But it's not like you're
Why doesn't it make
running
sense?
ICE in parallel. It's that you're,
Makes sense to me.
It's not. And that's precisely what's happening on the wire.
So stepping back and looking at it from the users, from the JavaScript code perspective, it would be kind of odd to have, if you had already got hold of one of these objects before you did an ICE restart, it would be kind of weird for that object to have its values change on the fly because you've done an ICE restart.
You told it to change. I mean, if you tell something to change and then it changes, that shouldn't be a surprise. You told it to change. That's like saying that the RTP parameters and RTP senders, they change when you set local and set remote. That's obvious because you told it to.
No, sorry, I think I maybe didn't explain that very well. What I meant is if you've retrieved this object before you did a restart, and it's got some values in it, and then you subsequently retrieve what is the current one, yeah, sure, you expect a different value, but you expect them to be different objects.
No, I wouldn't expect them to be different objects.
Okay, that's for me, I would expect them to be different objects.
Just like an RTP sender we don't change the object when we change the codex that we're sending with the new offer answer. It's the same object.
So now I really don't understand why you think you should change the DTLS object.
Well, the DTLS object has a problem in that it can't receive packets from the previous DTLS association because it can't distinguish between the two.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we would, but we're kind of stuck on that one.
Okay.
But there is a real issue with having two different ICE transports that you want to receive packets on at the same time, which is what you want to do during an ICE restart, and having a DTLS transport only associated with one of them, because now you can't send the packets from both ICE transports into one DTLS transport unless you somehow represent this relationship to the application, which I think is even more confusing. You're saying the DTLS transport has many ICE transports.
You can't do that anyway. So if you have multiple DTLS transports, they have to have different lifetime on the network.
Yes, two different DTLS transports have different ICE transports, but I'm saying we should have one. Each DTLS transport should only have one ICE transport.
But that's actually okay, because there is a point in time at which you switch, right? No, there isn't.
No,
There's a crossover
you
point.
have to be able to receive packets from both at the same time.
That is
Okay,
fair.
when does the switch happen? So if as JavaScript, I read, DTLS transport dot, whatever the attribute is, maybe it's just called transport, and at some point in time it's the old object, at some point in time it's the new object. I guess, then do we say basically when the new ICE transport object becomes connected, queue a task to, change the attribute, or?
But then what happens if you receive a DTLS packet on the old one after that, on the old candidate pair after that? Which you can.
So, what happens if you receive an RTP packet in an old candidate pair after that, right? I guess I'm trying to figure out what is the purpose. Is the purpose of these data structures to accurately reflect what is happening on the wire? And if it is, then I don't understand how. Ignoring DTLS entirely, I don't understand how accurately reflecting is happening on the wire to be like, here is an ICE transport that contains candidates from 2 generations of ICE. Does not seem like a very coherent way to represent what's happening on the wire.
But if there's a one-to-one mapping between DTLS and ICE transports, then that's the only thing that could work. That's what Peter's saying.
Well,
You're able to receive packets from both old and new candidate pairs. So how do you represent that?
Yeah. We already have a mechanism for having.
There's 2 ICE transports. We're saying it's actually a reflection of the situation.
Okay. I think we're going to have to move on from this one, but I'm trying to understand. I think we're basically going to have to come back with a new proposal on that. Is that fair?
Which issue is this? I'm happy to type some comments on the issue.
Yeah. So how about if we just continue to discuss this one in the GitHub and try to figure out how it ought to work? Yeah.
I think we can agree to part of it, which is that the DTLS transport needs to change at the point in time when the answer is applied. I think there was agreement on that. It's just a question of whether that triggers. I think the question is whether an ICE restart creates a new ICE transport or not.
Right.
But the part about the DTLS
Adam,
fingerprint DTLS ID changing had agreement.
So Adam, can you note that?
Yeah, so I note that the issue is if a new ICE transport is created or not, but the first thing was, Peter?
There's agreement that a new DTLS transport is created at the time that set answer.
Set remote. Yeah.
Well,
the answer is
it has
applied.
to be the answer when the answer is applied. But we don't have agreement on whether changing the ufragment password creates a new ICE transport or keeps the existing one.
So the change should happen when the answer is applied.
Yeah. This is 1406. I think, Taylor, we need to go back to 1306, or just trying to understand. So we might have to
skip something.
I think it was 1361.
We're at 1306 or 13?
Yeah, no, this is where we were. So,
sorry.
Basically, how should an application figure out what the objects are? I would suggest that we don't add any new APIs to do this because it's all possible purely in JavaScript by enumerating the senders and receivers. I mean, even as this like says. So, like, if you want to implement ICE transports, you could implement that in a few lines of JavaScript, Yeah,
I think this issue is more about the confusion as to when things get created than it is about, because get transports won't help you with that, right? You can only enumerate stuff that's already there. Okay, so I think we have. Do we have agreement on the proposed resolution of 1306, which is basically to not create a new API? Okay, so Adam, you can note that. Okay,
Yep.
1365.
Yeah, do we want to add get stats for DTLS and ICE transports?
Yeah, Nevar, do you have an opinion on that?
Would they actually have stats? That's not really been established. Okay, presumably we would have to have some. Does anyone have straw man?
Transport stats.
Or did we have also stats like bytes received and sent per candidate pair?
Well, and
Actually, there's just RTC transport stats, which encapsulates both ICE and DTLS.
Right. Hmm.
well, it seems to be a bug.
Well, let me ask this. Is there anybody who feels this is something that we need to do? I'm not hearing much request for it. So can we resolve this one? No, we won't do this.
I think that's fair.
Okay. All right.
This is what we were just talking about. Okay. So
1413.
yeah, for negotiating the data channel, there are two parameters that are relevant here. There's an ID field and negotiated, which defaults to false, which means, or actually, which means it does in-band negotiation using a data channel open message, and you can set it to true if the application is, figuring out IDs out of band. So the question is, what happens? Basically, there's some weirdness if you set negotiated to false, but still choose an ID, because RTC Web Data Protocol requires that the identifier in the data channel open message is based on your DTLS role. So basically, application could say, I want a data channel with ID 0, but then later your DTLS role indicates that you should have used odd IDs. What happens? That currently that would be a violation of RTC Web Data Protocol. And I propose that we just throw an error if the application happens to do that, which is not really something they should be doing in the first place.
Okay. Any objections to that proposal?
I don't have a objection to that. However, when you provide the ID and there's not out-of-band negotiation, what does the spec currently say about what channel is going to get used? Is it actually look at the ID, or does it simply ignore the ID currently?
It does use the ID as far as I'm aware.
I thought the ID only was valid in out-of-band negotiation and was totally ignored at other times.
That would make life easier.
Yeah, it would make life easier. And I'm not sure why there are two fields in the first place, as opposed to just saying, if the ID is undefined, then it does in-band negotiation and the user agent chooses IDs. And if the ID is defined, then you do out-of-band negotiation. I'm not sure why it's even possible to pick the ID and do in-band negotiation, but that's how the spec is right now.
I think what's going on is there was a little bit of disconnect between the IETF spec and what got written down in the W3 spec here. I think ID was it was in there as a dictionary element, but it was only expected to be provided in the case of out-of-band negotiation.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure about Firefox, but Chrome currently does allow you to do this, so it could break existing applications. I guess that's true if we throw an error as well. But I mean, would you propose to just throw an exception if you have an ID that's set but negotiated false?
Or just ignore it?
Yeah. Basically, the question is.
I thought that was what Randall said. That if in-band negotiation is used, then it's just ignored. But
should we silently ignore it, or should we throw an error that says, hey, if you specify an ID, you have to specify negotiated equals?
I mean, silently ignoring is probably least likely to cause problems. If someone's doing in-band negotiation, I'm not sure why they care about the ID unless they just think they're supposed to pick an ID.
Oh, you mean if someone's currently doing it, we add an error, then it'll blow up on me.
Yeah. I believe Firefox currently ignores it if it's not an out-of-band negotiation. I can check that.
I'd be fine if we made that the rule. I would slightly prefer throwing an exception just so that the app knows, but if you think that's too risky, then I'm okay with ignoring it. This is kind of like a you shouldn't be doing this anyway scenario.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, and I could easily be wrong, I remember arguing that providing the ID was the out-of-band negotiation flag, and I think other people wanted a separate flag and won the argument. But that's a long time ago.
I wish I was there back then. All right, so any objections to just ignoring it in this case?
Okay. Adam, can you note that as the resolution for this one? And also Taylor to create a PR for it, I guess. Taylor, are you the owner of this?
I guess I can be. Should be simple.
So the resolution is to ignore the ID when in-band negotiation is used. And Taylor would create a PR.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, another data channel themed issue. There's a priority enumeration that affects both DSCP markings used for the SCTP transport and the relative priorities of the data channel. I'm not sure why we sort of conflated the two things, but that's the way it is. The issue is that it's only a recommendation that you choose specific SCTP priority values based on the enumeration. So implementation could choose some other value. And this integer value is what goes in the data channel open message. So then, if an implementation chooses some value that doesn't exactly map to an enum, then what priority do you get for the data channel created on the other side? And more specifically, what should the priority attribute return and what DSCP value should it use? And I would propose we just specify basically if the range is from 0 to 128, map to this priority value 129 to 256, etc. Or just something. I don't know if any implementations actually would choose to use other values.
It's something of an edge case. I don't know why anyone would bother with this, but I'd be fine with defining it as those ranges.
Now, do you know why those values were chosen as opposed to just 0, 1, 2, 3? I
don't remember. I think you'd have to go back and check the archives from the meetings. I suspect.
Sorry, go on.
I suspect someone like Tuxin or someone else in the room thought it was good to preserve some space for future changes.
Yeah, I kind of like Tim here. I kind of like the range thing because it lets you slightly decouple the DSCP markings from the SCTP priorities. So you can have within one DSCP marking, you can have multiple SCTP priorities. I can't think why you'd ever do that. You could, I suppose, in a game or something.
That's a good point. It at least offers the implementation that leeway.
We do have a PR, by the way, to disambiguate the conflation of DSCP and this SCTP scheduling thing.
Well, after reading the, I forget what document it is. I think it was the QoS document. I don't think we can actually do that because it is one value that you pass in to create data channel that affects both. And yeah, it's also unfortunate that they chose different naming. Like one is, I think, very low and the other is below normal or something like that. But it is meant to be the same thing. All right, any opinions on what the range should be, or just did what I mentioned earlier sound okay?
So what should it be mapped? So if it's 129, it should be mapped to 256.
Yeah, or second value of the enum. But the actual, priority that's used internally, I guess, would be, the value that's in the open message. It should be symmetrical. So I'm not sure it really matters, but.
Okay.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, and Adam, Taylor, I guess, to create the PR on that one. Okay.
I think I have a long list of PRs I need to create.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. Let's see. So, an issue discovered here with DTMF. First of all, did we have some kind of decision before about when the DTMF sender is created? Is it only when you set descriptions with a usable telephone event format?
Yeah, it wouldn't make sense to have it created when you weren't using it.
Okay. Then the question I had was, what happens in the corner case where a subsequent negotiation removes that format? Does the attribute go null? And then also what happens if you call insert DTMF on it? I think the application would want some way of knowing that it actually didn't get inserted successfully. So I would propose, just for simplicity, that once the object's created and the attribute is set, it doesn't go away, and that we add an exception for, if you're not able to send it.
Yeah, I think taking away objects is a real problem. We need some kind of state on them instead.
It just seems to add complexity to no benefit.
That sounds like a good idea. I was just going to ask, when we might have a confusion about, like, when you create an initial offer and you just sort of do default, like, what controls whether you offer DTMF? What controls whether the offer has DTMF in it or not?
I assume JSEP says it's always offered.
I think it does. I heard you say something that seemed like it wouldn't be that. So I think it's always offered. If it's not
No,
negotiable,
this would be like if
we don't create
just in the corner case where you set a remote description that doesn't have it for whatever reason.
Yep. Okay.
Yanamar here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I dropped. I had to come back. So I missed the part about the DTMF. My understanding was that the object attribute was pretty much always there, and that calling insert DTMF would just throw invalid state error if it couldn't be.
I'd be fine with that too.
I mean, the current language says a null value indicates that this RTP sender cannot send an DTMF, which I read to be this is an audio, this is a video sender rather than an audio sender. The benefit.
I think that'd be simpler, actually.
Then how do you know you're going to be able to send it before you call it and get an exception?
The state of.
Do you look at the codecs?
So Yonivar's point here is that if it's audio, then you have one, and if it's not, you don't.
Right.
And when you negotiate, you figure out whether you can actually use it or not, but that doesn't change whether the object is present.
Right, but then how does the application know if it can use it or not?
Well, the steps are if transceiver
is stable.
No, how does it have to go look in the codecs and see telephone event is in there, or does it have to send and then see it blow up and then go, oh, this doesn't work? Because before it could say if null or if not null, or not before, but in the alternative approach.
I'm not sure about the front of it.
Yeah, but then you still have the problem with renegotiation where it disappears on you in that case. But you have a reference to an object. But you might have gathered a reference to the object already and you just, now it's dead.
Regardless, we need to be able to fail. So in that case, so insert DTMF has to be able to fail anyhow.
Right, and also
should be. Sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say that the object also serves another purpose, which is that's where you add. It's the event target for the on tone change event. So if we keep nulling it out, what happens to the event target?
That's a good point.
All right,
so should we add an attribute that's like this thing works, enabled, whatever, or should we just let it blow up and you learn the hard way, have fun?
Well, if you do get parameters, Peter, wouldn't you? And the telephone event is in the codec list. Why wouldn't it work?
Yeah, that's one thing I mentioned before. I mean, if that's what we say that they're expected to do, then I'm fine with that.
I think an application trying to send DTMF tones and not having the telephone event codec is pretty corner casey anyway. So
okay,
I think saying it's always there for audio senders and we throw an exception if there's not the format negotiated is probably should be good enough for anyone.
So to summarize, we always have a DTMF sender on an audio, an audio RTP sender, and it blows up if you don't have telephone event, but the JavaScript can go check to see if it has telephone event before if it wants to.
Okay, Adam, have you got that?
I'm fine with that.
Yeah. DTMF is always set for senders of type audio, but insert DTMF can fail. So you want to write something about that, you can check the telephone event codec audio. Yeah,
okay.
It's recorded at least.
Okay.
Oh boy. So it's possible to set both to end up with SDP created by a peer connection that has two identical N equals NSIDs, or at least if not in the same description, at different points in time. For example, you set one description and then the M section gets rejected, but you add the track again, and there's a new M section, but it still uses that track ID. But because it's on a different transceiver, there's a new receiver, there's a new track. So should you end up with multiple remote media stream tracks that have the same ID? That seems pretty weird to me. So I would suggest, one simple resolution could be just, if a pure connection is trying to create a remote media stream track and it already has one of the same ID, then just falls back to auto-generating the ID, which we already have in other circumstances anyway.
So what happens here when you get two tracks, say an audio and video, and they're on different transceivers because they're running on totally different IP addresses, but they're supposed to be synchronized, and so they're in the same stream?
But I don't think that has anything to do with their.
I'm only talking about track IDs, not streams.
Right. So your problem is that you got the same stream ID.
No, it's track ID.
The same track ID on tracks in the same transport or on different transports?
Well, having the same track ID on two tracks anywhere is, I don't think, consistent with the idea of a track ID.
So like, does the application get a track event with two different objects that have the same ID? That seems like pretty unexpected. And I don't know if,
Actually, couldn't you get this with just two pair connections?
That's sort of a different issue. Yeah, if
you have two pair connections, you get two remote descriptions with the same track ID in the SDP. Does it spit out two tracks, one for each pair connection with the same track ID? That also kind of conflicts with the idea of a track ID being unique.
I don't know about track ID, but at least with stream ID, there's already language in the spec that says there are cases where they might not be unique. Like if you have multiple participants, it could be ID collisions.
Hold on, let me pull up the spec. Oh,
sorry.
What?
I was thinking about.
I thought until just recently, or actually maybe the change hasn't even been merged yet, the media capture and stream says that the stream IDs are always generated. So I don't know where we'd find that, do you know?
In media capture mean, I think.
You're saying there's a difference between media capture track IDs and stream IDs there?
No, I'm saying do you know where we say that track, the IDs may not be unique? I didn't know about that.
Let me find it. There was a note. There's a green note somewhere.
Oh, okay, let's see. Well, now we have something that says if the object is created as part of a special purpose algorithm, its ID may be initialized by the algorithm, but doesn't say anything about uniqueness for media stream tracks. Maybe so about for streams.
I guess that is the question. Is it okay for two different tracks to have the same ID? If it is, then we can just delete this issue.
Yeah.
Seems kind of like contrary to the point of an ID, in my opinion. But if it's allowed, then let's go with it.
Wasn't this why we switched to transceiver mid? Because, I mean, within a peer connection, it can be unique. But if you're talking about the actual ID on the track or in the stream, those objects have to coexist potentially with other streams and tracks from totally different peer connections. So in that sense, it can't really be unique.
Okay, well, I guess we don't have this problem then.
Okay.
Okay. We got that resolution, Adam?
Yeah, so track IDs don't have to be unique. We can delete the issue or close it.
Okay. All right. So we have a bunch of miscellaneous issues that we're going to try to cover. Can't believe we got this far, but I guess that's good.
Sorry.
Well, we did skip over one and we didn't go back to it.
Well, let me try to get through at least a few of these. So we have 1259. So Cullen asked, how do you discover what algorithm identifier values the browser supports? And I think the answer to that is you can't right now, other than knowing that the mandatory to implement algorithm should be there, or trial and error. So I guess my question to the group is there interest in providing a solution to this?
So there's an interesting point here is that it's not enumerable in the sense that you could provide a complete enumeration of all the different numbers and combinations of values that are supported here. So that's difficult. And it's also true that that's important and relevant. So it's a pretty significant amount of effort to describe, to build a language to describe what's actually supported. So I would suggest, no, we shouldn't be interested in doing this simply because it's hard and it's not really that bad when you consider the fact that you can just ask, can you do this, yes or no, and it's going to either work or not.
So I'm looking at code, right, like how our code right now is, we're just browser sniffing what the browser is and making a list of supported ones given the browser. And
that sucks.
Right? What's that?
Yeah, that's going to be very brittle because the DTLS versions are constantly changing and stuff like that.
Yeah, because we're going to change that.
I agree, that's an awful idea. I'm just pointing that is actually the best thing you can do right now. For the reasons that you just said, if it's not enumerable, is the reasons why just generate and test doesn't work.
Why not? You can generate and test based on a preference order. You can say, I want this one and would be prepared to fall back to this one and have a list of things and keep trying till one works, right?
Not really. I mean, it gets harder when you start talking about the curves for that. I do not think that it would be very hard to make a language that returns these things. I think you wouldn't want to return the list of not the exponential combination. What you'd want to return is, what are the hashes you support? What are the, named curves you support?
It's a combinatorial explosion. It's difficult.
I'd play the other way and say maybe the browser should return a list of recommended supported combinations. So like there's only going to be I mean, at the moment there's a list of 2, right? That we recommend. Why don't we return a list of 2 now and 4 in the future of things that are recommended? And then if you want to try and run variants on those and up the hash or change the hash or something, then that's your risk. But at least you're returning a list which gives the browser a good chance of knowing what will definitely work.
That makes sense. It just seems like we need something here better than the current situation.
Well, let me ask this. Is I think that was Tim's suggestion, are people interested in pursuing that?
But is that for us to do, or would that be more for the web crypto folks to look at?
I would assume it would be like an algorithm on get certificate, right? Some kind of method. Like a static method on it?
Yeah. So one thing you could do, though I'm not sure it's a great idea, would be to have an API that said, if I asked you to make a certificate, what would you make by default? Which I suppose, if you worry people are going to spend all the time making our 2048 certificates, that's kind of a valuable API. If you're worried they're going to make, ED25509 certificates that are basically free, then that's an interesting API. I guess, Colin, what is it you're trying to accomplish here? Like, why are you doing anything at all?
Because to keep these things stable over time, we've got to generate our own certs, right? So that we can track them. And we have some people who do not want to use elliptical curve things. So we're choosing non-elliptical or curve ones. So for the people who are using non-EC, we need to figure out how to ask for something
and it's hard to figure out what to ask for. It's not a very big space, but the actual case we're interested in is the shockingly small half of the space, right?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I could see situations where we might know that the other end isn't keen on receiving a particular, particular certificate because it's a constrained device that has hardware that doesn't do that or something. So we might actually want to have a quick look at a supported list and say, hey, this is our best bet.
Yeah, I mean, like if we look, this is for, it's not even for the application. It's for given sets of customers using the application can set preferences, right? So it's like runtime. But if we could say, hey, we're looking for something that's supported and, has at least SHA-256, if that's the policy that they want to enforce. We're only going to choose things that have at least that. And then we can get a list back, filter those lists you suggested back, filter through it, pick something that looks like it'll work and go, right?
I mean, I think the real, to expand on Cullen's point, I think the real use case is actually compliance, because then you can say we're using at least this.
But I guess I'm still like not understanding why Martin's suggestion doesn't work okay. I mean, I guess I don't object to Martin. I don't object to this proposal as much as Martin does. But I mean, I guess so. The difficulty I think is that especially for RSA, basically it is not. I mean, I suppose they give you a numerable set, but it would be a very, very large set. Because it would be like every number between 2048 and 16,000, right? Oh, you mean E? Yeah. I mean, so like definitely you guys don't really deserve to have an opinion on E. And if you have an opinion on E, probably you're like have a bad opinion. I think that I think either we're going to have to come down on some relatively fancy language to describe this, and it's going to be not generic. It's going to be specific. Namely, it's going to be like RSA is going to have to be described differently, or you're going to have to query. I don't really see a way around this two. I mean, the language you use to describe RSA. I mean, so like language you use to describe RSA is all things language you describe DSA. It's CDSA.
Sure, but returning an object that said returning something that had a parameter, min RSA length, max RSA length, had a list. Returning a dictionary that provided you with all the information you needed would be really pretty easy and would have less than 50 things in it.
I mean, I'm not saying it would be sparse, but I guess I'm saying it would require that when we then added hash integers, you would need to define yet another language for this, right? That basically every single one of these, every single type of signature algorithm will require a new structure to describe it.
Sure, but I mean, you've had 5 of those in the last 30 years. I mean, of which we're using 2 or 3 here. I mean, I
there's another 2 coming. We know that there's more coming. So
I totally agree on that, but I'm just sort of saying I don't think it's really that big, and all the reasons that you're saying that this is hard to do should seem like exactly the same reasons why it's really hard to not have this.
I mean, I don't. Maybe. And what's the language for describing how you want to make an RSA key, Martin? I can't remember what it is. Yeah. And so where's and just find a language, get certificate. Trying to find this in the.
Well, we removed get algorithm.
Right, but how do you? But I know there's a way to tell it what you want to make, right?
Yeah, you pass it one of these objects that says almost exactly this.
Yeah.
Like you've got 2 in front of you.
Right. So I mean, okay, but someone has to. I mean, I guess if someone wants to describe, or someone wants to produce a PR that has the language for this, I suppose we could have that. But I mean, someone's got to do that.
I guess Tim's proposal was actually a lot simpler than that, which was just to return a list of these valid algorithm identifiers that one could put in.
Right.
That's just
right. That's actually something else that I think we plausibly could do, which is to say, like not invent a new language, and say basically, either you shove out RSA, or or you shove out like a curve, an ECDSA and a curve, and like we're not going to promise anything about we're not going to promise anything about RSA parameters you actually take. You're on your we'll take same parameters, but you're on your own. Then it would be just subsetting these structures. I do notice, by the way, that this ought to say you have to we're going to support PSS. Yeah, it's very unfortunate. Thank you,
we don't actually support PSS right now, but we need to add that.
So I guess.
Okay. So here's the question: is there interest in pursuing Tim's proposal in a PR?
I'd be happy to review that. I don't have a problem with doing it if we do it.
Okay. So Adam, why don't you take down that's the resolution is to create a PR along the lines that Tim Penton just described, which is to basically generate potential algorithms, non-exhaustive, no language or anything. And then we'll review the PR, see where to go from there.
Who will do that PR?
What the hell, I'll do it.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Next one is 1215, rollback. So the question is this a feature at risk, or is the current implementation what's the current implementation state?
It's currently implemented in Firefox.
Okay. Any other browser vendors want to comment?
So we just spent about an hour discussing rollback on the JSF call yesterday. So if Chrome doesn't want it, that'd be very interesting to me. I assumed Justin wanted it, which is why he was spending time on it.
As a practical point, it's very difficult to figure out how to build an application that recovers from errors without rollback. So I find this whole what we even mean by feature at risk very confusing. I mean, I don't.
Well, that's true as well.
And so, once again, we have the problem, and there are lots of JSF and WebRTC. And so, yeah, I don't even know how we go.
I'm having a hard time hearing Echo. Anyone else?
Echo is trying to speak through Martin's microphone.
Yeah, I'm sorry. As I said, this is a feature in the JSF spec. Hence, it is a dependency of the WebRTC spec to do so. So I don't know if we need to do more. I guess if people think we should remove this, then we got to discuss this also in in prod, because this is a feature that's been working the last call for JSF.
So I guess that's what I'm trying to ask is there any desire to remove this?
I think we should keep it. And if I guess I'm Taylor, Peter, are you guys not planning to do it?
I guess we're planning on doing it. It's not at the top of the list of things to do, but
okay. Well, if that's true, then we should then I think we should just move on. We'll assume it's not a feature at risk. That was just a question. If there are implementation plans from two browsers, then. So I guess Adam, I think the resolution here is just close this 1215. Okay. Now 1283. Not much time left, but I think this maybe. Actually, let me see. This might not. If there's one. Yeah, let me do this one. Sorry, apologies, Colin, but I think it might be a little bit quicker.
And we'll sort out the other one. It's okay.
Okay. So issue 763 and also 1323 is about the handling of encoding decoding errors. And this was from UN Sublay. So there's a fundamental question here, right, about the resource model that we're using. And so in section 432, it says if a system has limited resources, create offer, returns an offer that reflects current state so that set local description will succeed. And it remains usable until the fulfillment callback of the return promise. So the question is, it says remain usable by at least until this. Can errors occur later? So everything's great in set local description, whatever you ask for a certain number of simulcasts and you get it. For example, you had resources when you called set local description, but somehow they're no longer available when you call set remote description. So you've said, I want to send 4 simulcast streams. The other side says, sure, I'll take them. You call set remote. Can you get an error because somehow you can't send 4 anymore? Or apply constraints was called and somehow the height, width, and frame rate got changed. The promise is fulfilled, but subsequently somehow the encoder resources aren't available. Or you call set parameters, you modify scale resolution down by, the parameters are valid, so the promise is fulfilled, but somehow the encoder resources aren't available. So it's basically a question about the fundamental model we're using here in WebRTC. Are there errors, are these kind of encoding errors, can they occur? Currently, we don't have an on-error event handler in the sender receiver or in ORTC for that matter. So I think we're assuming that these kind of errors cannot happen. Obviously things are best efforts. The encoder or decoder could be overloaded. You'll, find that out from the stats. Peter, do you have a comment on this?
This is Randall. I have a comment. As far as the set local description to set remote description, I think the way it's currently set up, I don't think there's any expectation that you could get an error when set remote description is called, that the resources would no longer be available there, and that it would you'd get an error instead. So I'd say that's fine as it is. As for apply constraints or set parameters changing the what's required of the encoders and decoders, such that the system might not be able to provide it anymore. You're absolutely right. We haven't put in any sort of error recall there, but it's expected that the browser will adapt to what resources and load there is on the encoders and decoders, and downscale, down frame rate, etc., as appropriate for the degradation and so forth, in order to make things work and do its best effort. So I don't think that an error at those points is necessarily justified. I'm willing to hear counter arguments, but I think that's my current opinion.
I agree with Jessup. There are lots of reasons why we might adapt, in particular because there's not enough bandwidth available. So why not adapt when there's not enough hardware available?
Right.
What if it's
so basically, you're saying, Peter,
you only had, what if somehow you ended up negotiating with only one codec and it only has a hardware implementation, and for some reason it stops working?
Good question. You get no frame.
Well, if it stops working, it stops working, and you don't get anything.
Yeah, well, then your stats would reflect that, right? It's basically, it can happen. Your bandwidth is so low you can't send any video, right?
Right, and also stops working is different from the resource doesn't exist. The whole resource reservation stuff around create offer and set local description was to guarantee that the resource existed not necessarily that the resource is functional. If something, if something breaks in the system, something breaks in the system. I don't, we could define a something is broken event of some sort, but that would be kind of separate from the resource reservation question.
Okay. So I think, Adam, I think the resolution here is we do not, these errors, it's a best effort system. These kind of hard errors don't occur. And I think that's the consensus we've heard so far. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I can't believe we got through all but 2 of these. But I think we're out of time. Thank you, everybody.
So what's the name of the bar?
Sure. Hey, Cullen, was the scaling and resolution one yours?
I think it was sort of after, I mean, when we were JSUP, we realized that JSUP and WebRTC seem to have different points of view on this, and Ecker was mostly running with it.
Okay. 1283. Okay, I'll take a look at that.
Okay.
And there may be there may be stuff in the latest JSUP that, make sure you get the JSUP out of JSUP.
Okay.
We may have fixed some of that.
Okay. Well.
Yeah, no, it'd be great to look at. Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
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 Bye.